This session will be about Project Nexus, which was mentioned by Hyun early in the morning. So the speaker will be Maha Dimachki. She is the head of the Innovation Hub, Singapore Center of the BIS. She started the position in October 2023. And before that appointment, she was head of the Department for Early and High Growth Oversight at the UK Financial Conduct Authority, FCA, leading a team in charge of providing supervisory support for startup firms in the UK. And before that, she headed the FCA's payment department and served as Chief Payments Officer at Pay.UK, the UK's operator of retail interbank payment systems. And Maha joined the FCA in 2017 to set up the first payments department, and she was responsible for crafting and implementing the FCA supervisory strategy for the UK payment sector. And she also held a senior position in the commercial banks before. So I'm very happy that she will give us some insight on how the Project Nexus can enhance cross-border payments. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ilyok. Really appreciate that. I think I was going to stand up, but it feels like it's probably better to stay seated. So Project Nexus is now actually in handover. It's going to, a new entity has been set up. It's owned by 5 central banks, and we're very pleased to be a partner in the handover process. But once it's implemented, it's an independent entity. And so what I wanted to talk about here is actually some of the lessons learned from taking something from an idea to full implementation. And I've got a few slides to show you here. So we'll talk a bit about sort of Project Nexus, the headline of what it does, but also we'll talk about, what made it this candidate to move from a concept to full implementation. Whilst we think about new ideas, whenever we're innovating, you have to start with an idea. You have to start somewhere, but often there's still certain gaps. And where do you go from now that Nexus is implemented? Well, what could be next? So when we looked at incubating Nexus, I think the key thing was, what was the unique selling point that Nexus can bring? And there were bilaterals interlinking instant payment systems on a bilateral basis in Asia that were happening at speed, and they were becoming popular. But obviously, they're not scalable. If every time, you need to set up a bilateral, if you want to do that with 10 countries, it becomes quite difficult. Anything we heard over 2 becomes quite difficult. And so, we looked at, wouldn't it be a good idea to actually look at a multilateral sort of hub where if the instant payment system connects once, it connects to all of the other instant payment systems that are connected to that hub. It also takes the really popular instant payment system infrastructure that already exists. And this is what the bilaterals have done. They've proven that, you can take advantage of this infrastructure that's already there, that's proliferating around the world, to look at, enhancing retail cross-border payments. And we needed to make sure that, it's a project that also delivered on the G20 target roadmap for cross-border payments. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But crucially, when we're thinking of using instant payment infrastructure as sort of the base, we also needed to make sure that this was a public-private partnership. So we had guiding principles, and these were specifically, they came to the fore when we started to look at the blueprint. But it was important to have guiding principles that really guided all of our different work streams for this work throughout the journey of Nexus moving from sort of a proof of concept to implementation. And these were the 6 guiding principles, public policy goals. I mean, this is what central banks were interested in, obviously. What the public policy sort of sentiment needed to be at its heart. But it also needed to be inclusive for users, for consumers using it, but also for those participants in the ecosystem that need to be part of the Nexus ecosystem. It had to be neutral, so it wasn't necessarily favouring one group over the other. Financial sustainability was something very important. When you're building a structure like this, it can't be. We didn't want it to continue to be funded by grants or government money. It had to stand on its own 2 feet. So the design took that into account, but it also had to be agile. So modular. How do we make sure that it can interoperate different instant payment systems around the world, etc. And obviously scalability was very important. When you're setting up a structure, we always think about the global reach of that structure, and so scalability was at the heart of all of the different work streams, and I'll talk to that in a moment. So we went from the technical blueprint to a proof of concept, and a lot of those principles that I just mentioned really came to the fore when we looked at the comprehensive blueprint. The proof of concept wasn't production ready. So it proved basically that you can link 3 instant payment systems. In this case, it was the Eurosystems TIPS, Pay Now in Singapore and Do It Now in Malaysia, through a hub. It's technically feasible to send instant payment systems between one and the other if they all connect into the one hub. But it wasn't production ready. So the comprehensive blueprint is what we built to make sure that we build a production ready framework for taking this into the real world. And then obviously phase 4, which we're in now, it's the handover phase. You could see there the 5 central banks and our previous general manager, Agustin Carstens, kind of signing the agreement that we will hand this over and they will take it away and set it up. This has kind of kicked off a new entity being established and so on. So, with the blueprint, we started with the 5 central banks in the ASEAN region. You can see there Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand and Malaysia. But crucially what we did is took advice and support from 7 global advisors, global partners. These are 7 central banks around the world outside of the Asia region that made sure that we are not building something that is idiosyncratic to Asia but can actually reach the globe. It's suitable for global scalability. And this sat across the 3 work streams. At the bottom you could see technology and operations, scheme and governance, and the business and commercial adoption. These work streams, we kind of kicked them off in parallel. They're not sequential. But for example, when we look at scalability, we needed to make sure, there are different sort of technology requirements, rules, etc. in different countries. We need to make sure that these were taken into account. Same with the scheme and governance, and we held sort of high standards in terms of the scheme rule book. And obviously the business and commercial adoption, the incentives and so on are different in different countries, and so we had to consider all of those things. So the global advisors, if you're looking to build something that is global in nature, actually having advisors there to guide you was very, very helpful for us. So what I thought we'll do here is I'll stop talking, although what I'm going to show you is going to feature me as well. But I'm going to show you this budget video that you could hear from the central banks that were part of this project and hear what they had to say.
Digital payments have become so easy that we hardly give it a thought. With a few taps of your thumb and you're done. Except when it comes to sending a payment to another country. Despite all of our advancements, the challenges and frustrations remain. Now, a solution is near. Instant payment systems in different countries connecting once through a single hub. The solution is called Nexus, a project led out of the Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub in Singapore with our partners around the world.
The success of Project Nexus is enabling a coalition of first-moving countries to work towards connecting their domestic fast payment systems.
Nexus links your bank account with an applicable ID, such as a phone number, allowing you to send money across borders within seconds.
With Nexus, we can achieve instant cross-border payments linkages at scale through a multilateral approach.
Central banks have always played a role in payments as a public good. With Nexus, this role will be extended to cross-border payments, maximizing the network effects.
It's a natural market for both payments and remittances. So Thailand is in a good position to benefit from this. And that's reflected in our strategy and our approach.
There is a compelling case to develop a multilateral payment network that will further improve on our existing bilateral payment linkages.
One of the value propositions for us from Nexus is being able to link up very, very easily and speedily with other economies as well.
According to a World Bank assessment, the average cost of remittances is about 6.2% or so. Even at 6.2%, I think there is considerable scope for reducing the cost, and Project Nexus is trying to achieve that.
This collaboration with partner countries will help deliver a platform that is scalable, low cost, and benchmarked against global standards.
We expect cross-border exchanges in commerce, tourism, employment, and education to grow. Instant payments connectivity like Nexus will support the growth of these exchanges.
Central banks, such as ourselves, need to play an important role. This includes setting the overall tone, fostering collaboration, and streamlining the approach.
It is a partnership of central banks with a shared vision of transforming cross-border payments so that it's efficient and reliable.
This is a precursor to greater international cooperation among countries to achieve these twin objectives of making fast payments at a reduced cost.
The BIS is proud to participate with our partners in this project to advance our shared vision of a global multilateral network of connected fast payment systems.
Nexus has the potential to be a global service, creating benefits for economies and citizens around the world.
And that's our budget video. This is me and my team actually having to be the actors, but at least it's. We won't be doing that we won't be leaving our day jobs anytime soon. I mean, you heard from the governors, and I think that it was important to get the support of the governors, and kind of here is where I wanted to talk a little bit about the lessons learned. And why was this a candidate for handover? There was some ingredients that we really, they presented themselves that made this a good candidate for handover, where we looked at the clear use case. We're building on the bilaterals, they're popular, and more of them are happening, and so a multilateral approach was a natural next step. The support from stakeholders. So in the ASEAN region, they also have this strategic sort of, economic integration. And so this was part of that work, and that's why it was really sponsored from the top. It was toned from the top, as one of the governors, Governor Rashid, you would have heard him say. And so this was shared across all of the partners and the various regions that worked with us. But there were also enabling factors: the maturity of instant payment systems, and how entrenched they are, and how scaled they are on a domestic level, and the ability to use that infrastructure. And obviously the bilaterals are desired, and we can, but they can't be scaled. But there's also been a lot of conversations around interlinking instant payment systems, around the world. The CPMI has done some work on the governance and of interlinking instant payment systems, and so there's been a lot of initiatives that have been talking about this, and so it became quite a natural thing for us to consider. But other positive contributors is the senior sponsorship I mentioned, at the governor level, but the steering committee which I chaired had deputy governors and assistant governors, where we were able to make decisions, we were able to, they were able to really think about, not necessarily when you're making decisions on an operational level, they had a strategic lens. And so that was really important for kind of being able to progress the work very quickly. And obviously I mentioned the global input from our global partners to make sure that this was a global product at the end of the day. But there are things that we had to improve along the way, and things that we observed that were quite interesting, which I thought will be helpful to share. One is that project management is very, very important. And at the start when I first joined, and we had to really tweak the project management to get it right. We had to hire the right program manager, and that made a difference to be able to deliver on time and on budget. What we noticed is that even though the 3 work streams that I mentioned were done in parallel, everybody asked about technology first. What does this technology do? Is it familiar to me? And in this case, it was APIs and ISO 20022 messages. So it was quite familiar, but we really had to kind of answer some of these questions around technology first. Once everybody was clear on the technology, it was a case of, okay, well, what rules apply to me if I were to join this structure? So, the scheme rule book and the governance framework was very important. That became a very, topical conversation that we found we engaged in. And then once all of that was done, and particularly when we got to the handover stage in phase 4, everybody started to ask about, what are the incentives? What does the business viability, what does the business model look like? How can I take this information and take it to my investment board to be able to be part of this project? So incentives were very important. The incentives of all stakeholders were very important. But what I also wanted to say is we weren't solving all problems of cross-border payments with this structure. You have to start somewhere. And I keep saying, if you want to do everything, you end up doing nothing. So you have to start somewhere, and then you start to look at how you solve some of the other problems. So the roles and incentives, we have 3 key players in this ecosystem. I'm not taking the consumer, obviously consumer is an obvious one, but in terms of who will facilitate how this works, you've got the payment service providers either on the sending end or the receiving end. You have the foreign exchange providers, because obviously this is a cross-border transaction, and you have the settlement access providers, and those are the liquidity providers for the FX players. Now, one institution can play all those 3 roles. It could play 1 role, or it could play 2 roles. And so the engagement with them is really kind of delivering on that business case, looking at what potentially the fee structure would look like for Nexus, so they understand, what they pay, what are the incentives for them, how do we ensure that we benchmark it against some of the competitive solutions that are out there. So for these players, it is a competitive structure. And so the industry engagement was really important. It was heavy industry engagement, and the entity now, it's set up with, they've hired a CEO, and they continue to do that. But what's next? I think this is a slightly complicated chart, but I'll just really simplify it. So we're starting with this IPS linkage. So Nexus is now its own entity, but if you think about interlinking instant payments on a cross-border basis, 2 of the key frictions for cross-border payments we always get told are compliance and foreign exchange clearing and settlement. And so 2 of our projects, and this is where we can experiment with these ideas, take sort of the specific sort of components and experiment with them. One particular project looks at automating foreign exchange clearing and settlement by tokenizing FX and potentially settlement happening in tokenized central bank money. That's that middle layer, and we call that Project Rialto. And then the compliance piece is automating and streamlining compliance processes by pre-validating all the compliance requirements and kind of creating a verifiable proof that can be attach itself to the transaction. And this is where Project Mandala really addresses that point. And with Project Mandala, we've moved from stage 1 to now moving into stage 2. So without going into too much detail, this is where you start somewhere, and now this is going into implementation, but we're constantly thinking about what are the other components that we could potentially experiment with to reimagine, what the future financial market infrastructure should look like. And with all of this, whether we're looking at, projects, things that go into implementation, I think the integrity of the financial system is really important. And so a lot of our work around the Innovation Hub has really looked at this point of integrity of the financial system. Mandela, I explained, is one of them, which is around compliance. But we also look at transaction monitoring with one of our projects out of the London Centre, Project Hertha, as well as collaborative analytics on a cross-border basis. And this is another one of our projects out of the Nordics Centre, Project Aurora. And we've also got projects around cybersecurity. And so putting all of that together, you could see how we're putting together what we call a technology stack to combat financial crime or to, enhance the integrity of the financial system. So these are, again, experimental ideas that we'd like to put out there for, the community to consider and ask us questions. And so again, with this idea of imagining the future, we can't kind of escape the fact that tokenization has been a topic of this conference yesterday and today, and we've been experimenting with tokenization a fair bit with its features of programmability, atomic settlements, composability. The two projects that I mentioned just now, Rialto, the FX one and compliance one, actually borrows from tokenization, from the DeFi world. And so you could look at how some of the new technologies can really be used to either improve existing entrenched infrastructure that exists today, like instant payment systems, or it could potentially enable the new, where you're looking at a new structure, a new infrastructure that eventually over time could replace what exists today. And these are choices that various jurisdictions will make for themselves, but we're experimenting with those technologies across these different dimensions. And so finally, when we do all of this work, looking at some of our projects, this is sort of a summary of some of the considerations for the financial sector, where you look at the role of the central bank as a lender of last resort, the safest settlement asset, the private sector in terms of how they innovate and all the good entrepreneurial activity that they bring. Do you substitute or complement with these existing, with these sort of new technologies, as I mentioned? And whenever we're looking at these, interoperability is really at the heart, and we take that by design. We try to build things that are modular, that work with existing structures as well as new. And so this is really important as everybody is thinking about new technologies, to think about the interoperability piece. And that is the end of my presentation. Happy to do whatever you need me to do.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm sure you have many questions, but I think time's up. So I'm sure Maha will be available for any questions you may have after the session. Thank you.